Hey, what's going on, everybody? Wanted to say thanks for having me. Wes, really appreciate it. Thank you for Empath for having Cork here. My name's Andrew Moore. I'm actually the CRO of Cork. Um, just want to give you a little bit of background on us. We've been in the channel for 2 years, a little over 2 years. We're actually helping partners navigate their risk profile of their customers. And we came out with a new tool on new feature actually out on Tuesday, which is helping partners navigate uh, cyber insurance policies. And so it's really cool. It's actually been helping navigate that whole portion of the questionnaires and some of the things that policies cover and don't cover. So it's really helping understand the risk profile within those policies. So we're seeing a lot of traction, and we hope any of you that are out there that want to actually take a look at it, please do. It is a free feature for us. So again, glad to be here, glad to be a part of this great event. I'm really excited to be hosting this with Adam. Um, so yeah, hopefully we can bring on the man of the hour. I've actually he doesn't know this, but I've actually been stalking him on LinkedIn for the last couple of years. He actually hangs out with some of the people that I look up to and used to work with one of them being Matt Lee. So definitely been following this guy. He's definitely been an influencer in the channel. Has some really cool insights, and I mean, he's been a seasoned security professional. He's been in the game for more than a decade. He started as a help desk engineer and has worked his way up through various technical roles in cybersecurity, specifically in GRC, security architecture, and defensive operations. He's really passionate about his sharing his expertise and getting his insights out to the next generation of security professionals. He really believes in working together and sharing his knowledge. You know, we can make this place safer and more secure. I think that's one of the big things that everyone talks about in the community is rising the tide and really bringing security to that next level. So Adam, without further ado, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Hopefully, you'll see me poking in and stalking you on LinkedIn here and there. But pleasure being here with you.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Good seeing you guys. I've met a couple of people from Cork over the years. They're doing some fun stuff over there. So really cool to be able to work with Andrew on this. Really appreciate Wes and the Empath team for putting this on. On the topic of community and just rising tides, like that's what Empath's all about and what this is all about. And the really cool thing is just that we're doing this all for charity. Growing up in a more rural area, access to high-speed internet was something that I didn't have. I think I got my first high-speed connection when I was almost a teenager. So really cool to see that, you have the Rural Technology Fund and whatnot out there trying to make this happen. But what I'm here to talk about today is some stuff around CMMC. There's a lot of words and buzz around that going on in the channel these days. It's a pretty big topic, and we're going to try to break this down and what this means, why we're doing CMMC, why CMMC is a thing, how it impacts us in the MSP community, and what we can start doing about it. So I'm not going to spend too much time on my bio. I think Andrew did an awesome job introducing me here. But the really cool thing here is I'm over at a company called Axiom. We're a managed service provider out of Jacksonville. But as of this year, we've completed our CMMC certification status. We've gone through the full assessment process. We've been certified. We've built the system, wrote the policies, all the fun stuff that comes into that. So what we are going to discuss, like I mentioned, that brief history of CMMC, the quick overview of those requirements, but we're going to spend more time focusing on how CMMC impacts us as managed service providers, and then what that means when it comes to the assessment process and some of the challenges. But this is not an expert level class. CMMC is huge all by itself, and if we wanted to do a more expert level class, we'd be here for a week or two. This also isn't designed to complete your organization's CMMC journey. Every organization is going to be unique. As we've been going through our journey with our clients, their journeys are unique. So it's unfortunately not a one-size-fits-all approach. So we're going to start off here just getting into what CMMC is and what does CMMC involve. So CMMC, for those that aren't aware, is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It's built off the backbone of a document called NIST Special Publication 800-171, specifically Revision 2. NIST puts out some really great papers and technical procedures and guidance for us to work off of, and this is one of them. 800-171 specific focus is on protecting the confidentiality of a set of data called controlled unclassified information. And specifically, this document gets into those requirements to safeguard the confidentiality of not only CUI, but also FCI, that's federal contract information. And all the rules and regulations that come out of this is usually done under something called the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. That's a mouthful, so it's often referred to by us in that space as DFARS. And again, this is usually under the DoD framework. A quick caveat under that, there are some discussions about expanding that out to federal contracting as a whole. I did not write this session with that in mind, but that may come down the road sooner than we think. It's just something to be vaguely aware of in the space. So let's get in quickly into the origins of CMMC. This really got its start of quite a long time ago. The original documents and laws and stuff that started this program actually happened in 2003 under FSMA. That created special publications like NIST 853, which then led to the creation of 800-171 and a whole bunch of other stuff. But the DoD started to recognize a problem. They realized that there was some sensitive information. This information needed to be secure. So they started working through a process by just telling organizations in the defense industrial base, implement some safeguards. Well, no one did. Then they said, well, what if we started self-attesting to this? Like, submit, go through an assessment, write down how well you did, and tell us how you did. Be honest. Well, I'm going to point to the picture that I have over here on this slide. On the left are all aircraft and systems created by the United States. We know about the Black Hawk helicopter. A lot of us have seen Black Hawk Down. We've got the C-17 cargo plane and the F-35. And on the right-hand side are the Chinese versions. We're not allies with them. We're not sharing our defense secrets with them. But those look pretty eerily similar, especially when you look at like the Black Hawk and its derivative, or the F-35 and its derivative. So the DoD, recognizing the loss of all this intellectual property, they did their audit, they dug deeper into it, they realized it wasn't companies like Sikorsky or Lockheed or Boeing leaking the trade secrets. It was coming down to the controlled unclassified information in the subcontractor space. They realized that self-attestation was not working, and we needed something better. So this led to CMMC directly. In 2020 and 2021, they started proposing those frameworks. Originally started with that 5-level system, moved down to 2 levels. Just last year, the formal rule was officially adopted in December of last year, making CMMC official. And on the future horizon will be the addition of some additional rules that will actually require CMMC to hit federal contracts. But at the end of the day, the origins of this really come back down to a matter of national security. These items, and just again, looking at the picture here, represents our military's capabilities. It represents our ability to protect and serve our armed forces, and those capabilities directly impact our national security and our ability to protect the mainland. So it's not just the DoD coming up with arbitrary rules and whatnot. It is very literally a matter of national defense. So there are a lot of requirements under CMMC and all the subparts that come with it. So I wanted to highlight a couple quick ones here. The ones that tend to come up very often are DFAR 7012. That's the initial requirement requiring adequate security for the protection of CUI, and used 800-171 as its backing. It has the requirement for cloud services to be in a FedRAMP moderate environment. And it also requires reporting of cyber incidents to the Department of Defense. Later on, as this whole process moved and that whole history that I just went through moved forward, they introduced DFAR 7020, which requires that those assessments against NIST 800-171 and the submission of those findings. But then we got some more modern updates with DFAR 7021, which mandated the CMMC evaluations by those third-party organizations called C3PAOs. As a Star Wars fan, it's really hard for me not to say C3POs, especially considering I'm seeing Revenge of the Sith in theaters for the first time in 20 years tomorrow. So a little excited about that, but we're not here to get into that topic, although I could go off on a tangent about how the whole events of Star Wars could have been avoided if CMMC was adhered to by the Empire. But that's a conversation for another day. But as part of 7021, there are those annual self-assessments and those third-party evaluations every 3 years. And then just a couple of those federal rules and laws under 32 CFR creating the CMMC program in those tiers, and 48 CFR, which is integrating CMMC into the federal acquisitions process. For folks that really want to get into the technical, nitty-gritty, nerdy, legal, legislative portion of all this, and further details on the backstory of CMMC, there's a fantastic video by a gentleman by the name of Jacob Horn. He's done a video called The History of CMMC, and it's really good. It really helped me wrap my mind around this topic and understand where all these subcomponents come in. So for people that want to nerd out over all that, I highly recommend digging into that if you have some time. It's really great to listen to. So now I want to get into some of the program requirements. As I mentioned earlier, there's those 3 different levels that come out under CMMC. Your first level is just regarding the basic safeguarding of that federal contract information. Those are just 15 security requirements that come from one of the DFARS regulations. It requires an annual self-assessment and affirmation of compliance, and it's really just around the basic federal contract process. From there, though, we get into the protections around controlled unclassified information. That's where NIST 800-171 comes into play. Excuse me. And that can manifest in one of 2 ways. There are provisions for annual self-assessments, or you have to have that 3-year C3PAO assessment. The key differentiator on that will be the type of CUI present and the contract that's issued. If you're an MSP directly doing business with the DoD, you would see that in your contract. But if we're supporting our clients, they will get that instruction in their contracts. It's really important to look at that piece. And when dealing with CMMC, to ask, is it going to be a self-assessment process or the third-party assessment process? And again, the contract will tell you. But also as part of that, every year, each organization still has to go in and affirm their compliance levels. And then lastly, you do have level 3. CMMC level 3 is something that we don't tend to see very often in the MSP space. It's not an impossibility that it will come up, but it does exist. The main requirements for level 3 is to make sure that we hit that final status of CMMC level 2, but then it adds additional security requirements under NIST 800-172. Those are an additional 24 requirements. And the main objective for those kind of categories is to defend against more advanced persistent threats. So as a hypothetical example, if the US Air Force submits a contract out there to make some whiz-bang gizmo that goes in the latest generation of stealth fighters, it may be on the cutting edge of research and design. Much of those projects may be classified and more restricted, but they still need those parts that are unclassified. And they may realize in the course of that those parts need additional protection. So they add in those 172 requirements. So again, when we look at the MSP space and our typical client environments, level 1 and level 2 tend to be the main ones that we end up seeing more often than not. And a key differentiator on those, all CUI is FCI. So if a client has to do those CUI protections, they also have to do those FCI protections. But at the end of the day, the DoD looks at the highest level, which will come down from those contracts for level 2, most likely. So that really raises a big question then. If we as MSPs aren't directly DoD contractors, do we need to care about any of this stuff? Because after all, this sounds kind of like it might be a client problem. And after all, our clients, when they come up to us, they want solutions, they want those results, and we're there to help them get there. But the answer to this question really is, it's complicated. So let's look at some of the CMMC scoping documents here. In the CMMC scoping documents, they refer to a category of providers called external service providers. And this gets into very NIST speak here, but I think the key things that we can look at is that bottom paragraph in that picture there, where it says an ESP that is not a CSP, which is a cloud service provider, that provides technical support services to its clients would be considered a managed service provider. If it doesn't host its own cloud platform, it's, and then it gets into the, if we do offer those, those cloud services. But the key thing there, and we have to go to the paragraph above now, to be considered an ESP in scope, specifically controlled unclassified information or security protection data must reside in our assets. If that happens, we are in scope. So the big questions that we need to ask ourselves, do our clients have these CMMC obligations, and have they asked us to assist in providing those services or support? If the answer is yes, you get to join the fun here. So great, we're in scope. Now what? And I'm also a big fan of Jurassic Park, and I figure this is probably the most appropriate picture to put in here because CMMC is quite the wild ride. So we have to look at what we are providing for our clients. We need to look under CMMC and look at our services against these key areas of CMMC. There's 12 domains in there, from access control, awareness and training, configuration management, and a whole lot more. But to summarize this, do we facilitate account creation, system architecture, help desk support, security logging and monitoring, cloud services, antivirus services, security awareness training, and a whole lot more? Long story short, I just described, in my opinion, I just described everything that we do as MSPs. Then we also have to look at whether or not we have access to systems that store, process, or transmit CUI. Looking again at our typical MSP models, we push out our RMM agents, we deploy Screen Connect or whatever other remote access tool. We're pretty thoroughly into scope on those systems, most likely. But then we also do have to ask some questions around those tools and how those facilitate those items. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So how exactly do we fit into scope? Because scoping is probably one of the biggest challenges that we've faced in our journey around CMMC. Scoping and getting that right is the thing that can either cost you a lot of money, save you a lot of money, create additional problems, or solve a lot of problems. But the key thing that we need to consider when looking at scoping is following that data. There are some key categories that get called out, and the CMMC scoping guides are fantastic at being able to categorize this. But chances are, if you've got that CUI and FCI on it, it's likely a CUI asset, which requires the full protections of 800.171 to be layered on top. They're in scope for the client assessments, and they will be assessed. But then we have categories like security protection data, and this is really the category that starts pulling us as managed service providers into that scope. That's where it gets very tricky. Unfortunately, the DoD has refused to elaborate further and have simply defined security protection data as log data, configuration data, and most recently, passwords. That data usually gets classified as part of a security protection asset, such as your firewalls, your SIEM, SOARs, password managers, RMMs even. It gets very complicated in that regard. It is very important to try to make sure that we're understanding the data that we're working with, the data that we have access to, and adequately scope around that. However, a key category that we see from the scoping requirements here, if we are an external service provider and we store that security protection data or even controlled and classified information on our systems, that's part of the client's assessment. So what that ultimately means, do we get CMMC assessed and certified ourselves, which is the journey that I've been on over the last year, or do we participate in the client's assessment and be assessed as part of that assessment relevant to what we're doing? That's a few key considerations there. And we'll elaborate a little bit further on that, I believe, in my next slide. Nope, not the next slide, but the one after that. But this introduces a very interesting problem with our vendors and our tool sets. And this was probably one of our first big challenges working through CMMC that we had to run into and grapple with. We as MSPs have a lot of wonderfully awesome vendors that provide so much value to us and help solve so many challenges for us. But the unfortunate reality when it comes to CMMC is the vendors aren't quite prepared. When we look at our backup vendors, if they're storing that controlled unclassified information in there, they're likely falling under the definition of cloud service providers and likely need to go through the FedRAMP process. That's not easy and that's not cheap. On top of that too, from some of those backup vendors, I hear very often, well, we went ahead and built our system on a Microsoft Azure GCC High instance or an AWS GovCloud instance. That doesn't always solve the problem. So that's a challenge to work through. We looked at our security vendors, our antivirus providers, our logging platforms, our EDRs, etc. They're likely in scope as a security protection asset and have to align to some of those requirements. few of them are prepared to speak to that and have that information out there. I know there's some in the space that are already there. I know there's others working through it, but there's some challenges there as well. And then we have to look at our RMM vendors. They're likely in scope too. They're facilitating that remote access. They're helping provide our patching, our monitoring capabilities, but they often lack some of those required controls to cover that remote access and data collection and data storage. And again, I'm not here to sit here and bash vendors all day. That's a conversation for another day. And there are some great vendors out there that are working on this. I know when it comes to RMMs, ConnectWise has issued statements saying they're working on it. Kaseya has issued statements on their process as well. Ninja has gone through and they're FedRAMP ready and they're listed in the FedRAMP marketplace, which is probably one of my favorite things to see right now. The big thing on this right now is there are vendors out there that are working through these challenges. They're putting the hard work in just the same as we are. But until they get to those points, we as MSPs have to be skeptical. We have to do our research and our due diligence. And we can't just go off their approach of them saying, we're good, trust us. To Wes's comment in chat, there is no CMMC in a box option that we can really go off of. We can't just buy our way into compliance. But for right now, as it sits on April 25th of this year, resolving these issues likely requires rebuilding that tech stack. When we built our enclave and our support services, we had to go right back to basics. There were so many vendors we were talking to going through this process that were looking promising. The rules updated, and we had to promptly exit those conversations because they just weren't going to meet the requirements. This is probably one of the biggest challenges we as MSPs face with dealing with this, because without our tools, we lose our margins, we lose our efficiency. We've got to retrain the team. It's a mess. So when we're looking at the impact on us, ultimately at the end of the day, if we're in scope, we've got to align those services, people, and technology to those requirements under CMMC. That's a pretty big challenge, and we've got some decisions to make. Namely, do we build an enclave like Roddy mentioned, or do we try to align the entire company and revamp our entire operations? It's a challenge. We've also got to make sure our systems are secured appropriately as they touch and interact with that data, but we also have to write up a lot of documentation. When they look at a CMMC assessment, they look at those agreements that are in place that describe the services provided. There has to be a customer responsibility matrix, and we've got to have our statements in the client system security plan discussing how we meet the requirements. And like I mentioned, we have to be ready to join in on that assessment process. When they ask us how user accounts are created, we have to talk about that and make sure those security requirements are implemented throughout the account creation process. The same with incident response, backup, system configuration. The list goes on and on. So we as MSPs really have to decide, what are we doing about it? Do we want to be part of this? The easy option is, if we don't have any clients in the defense industrial base, the quick decision is, do we want any of those? If not, don't take their money moving forward, because once you take their money, you're on the hook for that, and that can get into a big, big problem. But if you only have a couple clients within the defense industrial base, you've got the option to commit to supporting them, going through your own CMMC journey, sitting with them through their journey, and doing that on a client-by-client basis. You can also decide whether you're going to go through CMMC yourself and get certified and assessed yourself. If that doesn't sound like something that you want to do, please, for the love of everything great here, send them to someone who can. Because otherwise, you're doing the client a disservice, you're putting national security at risk. It's a challenge. But if you do have a substantial number of clients in the defense industrial base, and this is what ultimately started Axiom's journey down the CMMC road, we saw this as a fantastic opportunity, and we committed. So we decided to spin up our processes around CMMC, our business unit for it, building our enclave. We went through the assessment process, and that was a huge undertaking. But we've done that, and that is something that MSPs can do. In fact, as I think of right now, there's about another 15 MSPs that have already gone through this journey that I'm aware of. It's not easy, but it is possible. So at the end of the day, we've got some decisions to make. But let's say you're crazy and you decide that hearing me talk about this, that you want to go through this, and you've decided that you want to commit to CMMC. First step in this process, grab some coffee and do some reading. There's a lot of reading to do. These documents that are listed out here are dozens, if not hundreds of pages long. But it's really important to read and understand what you're getting into. There's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of good, bad, and great information out there coming from different folks out there. It's really worthwhile just to go straight to the source and read it straight from the DoD. Those key documents, like I've mentioned it a few times over today, 32 and 48 CFR, your DFARS requirements, the CMMC scoping guides, NIST Special Publication 800-171, which details those 110 security requirements that have to be implemented. NIST Special Publication 800-171A, that's the assessment guide against 800-171. That details all 320 assessment objectives that an assessor looks for. Those documents are critical when going through a CMMC journey to learn and understand and learn how they're going to be assessed. And then the last bit there are those CMMC assessor guides. All these documents are easily Googleable. I think that's a word. I hope that's a word. If not, well, someone please write that down so we can get that a word. But you can easily Google them. You can find them. They're available for free from the DoD. They're not page turners, I'll say that much. But there's some really good and critical information in there. And the meme on the slide there, I am buried in documentation and paperwork every day. But it's just all part of the job. So now that we've read it and we understand what's going on here, we have to try to do some anticipation, and we've got to start figuring out how we're going to build this process. The key thing there is determining that CMMC level of our clients, because that's what we have to build our measures around. In our experience, most clients are in that level 2 category. Another thing that has really helped us in our CMMC journey is having a good consultant. We really recommend a quality C3PAO. Remember, those are the assessor organizations that have experience working with managed service providers. That has been so critically helpful for us in our journey because, you know, myself and Bobby Guerra, he's our company owner and kind of the other half of the coin here. It's really easy for us to get locked into our own echo chambers and our own thought processes around what CMMC looks like and how to do stuff. Being able to send those questions over to a consultant and get their opinion has saved us time and time again. I'm sure he would agree with me on that statement. It has been worth every penny. We've also had to update all of our agreements and contracts to incorporate CMMC into that process as well, defining things like what we're responsible for and what we are not responsible for. It's also really important in this process to set some timelines. Scope creep under CMMC is a real challenge. To keep ourselves on track, we had to set some hard deadlines. And the big thing on this one, it is very time intensive. It is very expensive. Microsoft licensing costs in their government enclaves, those have to be paid up front. Swapping out tool sets takes time and money. And it took us about a year to go through that process, but that is all I did. That was my full-time job, 40 plus hours a week, 52 weeks out of the year, plus him, plus other members of the team. It wasn't something that we could just pop in for a couple hours every Friday and make it happen. We also had to make some very big decisions about getting our stuff together. We had to make some decisions around whether or not the entire company would be in scope, or if we were to build an enclave. We built an enclave. That's what made sense for us because we didn't want to revolutionize our entire team's approach to what they do. Some companies that may be the best fit, other ones may say, you know what, it's easier for us to bring the entire company in scope. But one of the key things that's helped us in that process is we built our enclave around how we're going to support our clients. That's a really key thing to dig into and get done. Also realizing that we've got to, starting to get into that Q&A portion, I want to try to just fly through the remaining bits here. But develop that plan of action, write and adopt those policies, get your technology aligned to it, get your maintenance procedures. We all know that compliance is not a one and done kind of deal. We have to maintain that and start training the staff. Audit those vendors while you're doing it as well. Make sure they're aligned and can support you. Assess that your own organization. That's a key requirement of CMMC anyway. And while you're at it, document everything. Our documentation library is I'd say easily over 1,000 pages at this point of just text documents. Then prep for that assessment process. Get a good C3PO that has experience working with MSPs. Do those readiness assessments for yourself and your clients. Close out your plan of action and milestones, and then schedule that assessment. It is super critical to be prepared for that assessment because if you are not, they will find stuff, and that can result in a failure point. And trust me, auditors are great at finding those little tiny things out there that you've looked at time and again and think that you've got that well handled. It's a tricky one. So what does that assessment look like? There's about 3 phases. Your initial scoping that determines what's in scope and what's out of scope. Phase 1, which is just confirming some of those things and some of those key documents, those responsibility matrix, system security plans, making sure everything's in a final status and not in a draft. And then phase 2, which gets into that those detailed assessment items. Our assessment took about a week. We've heard of places that can do it a little bit faster and others that take a little bit longer. It really depends on your assessor. But in each day, they'll break down those CMMC domains to kind of align them and make it a little bit easier to work through them in bite-sized chunks. But they will be interviewing key staff. For us, it was myself and Bobby, as we've gone through and kind of divided and conquered the CMMC practices. But for our clients, they'll need to have a point of contact. The MSP will have to have a seat at the table. You want to be very careful about how the staff are being interviewed and make sure that they're prepared to talk about things. A big key item in that interview process is learn to embrace the uncomfortable silence. It's just like if you're under oath and being in court and they're asking questions, do not talk just to fill the time. Answer the question and nothing but the question. But then at the end of that, you get into your remediation and out brief. You may have some items that were deemed as not met, but you may have a 10-day window to correct those, depending on what the finding is. For instance, if you've got a documentation issue that just simply needs to have a policy updated because you forgot to update a version number or something, easy enough to correct. Did you forget to implement MFA? Yeah, you're probably not getting that done in 10 days. And again, at the end of the day, performing those self-assessments, much easier compared to the C3PAO assessment. Really recommend being extra thorough on your self-assessments, taking them seriously, drilling deep into them, because if you don't, your auditor will. So you've managed to do everything so far. You've passed the assessment. Now what? Work on that responsibility matrix. That document is super critical, talking about how CMMC services get delivered to the client. It determines what you do and what the client has to do. It's really a great and key document to have in place. And it's honestly something that I look forward to being able to pivot outside of CMMC to bring across to the rest of the organization because of just how clear it divides those lines. But keep evolving these practices. Our maintenance procedures, our first iteration of them, they were pretty primitive. Working with our teams internally has helped us evolve those practices and be better. Not to mention that vendor problem that I talked about earlier. Vendors are working on solutions. RMM vendors are showing up. Security vendors are showing up. Keep an eye out for those and keep evolving. Now, some quick additional resources. A peer group I really love is MSP CyberX. That's run by a CMMC assessor and some other companies that have gone through the CMMC process. They've been a great peer group to work through. If you want more information about how we've gone through our journey, Bobby and the team, we've got a podcast called Climbing Mount CMMC, and that really breaks down our journey, the technical problems and the hurdles around it. We've had some great guests on there. We've had Wes, Matt Lee, plenty of others out there as well, and names that we know and love in our industry. It's really that peek behind the curtain for how we've done all this. For looking through the MSPs that are completing that journey and are trying to shape how CMMC works across the industry as a whole, there's the MSP Managed Service Provider Collective. That's a great organization out there trying to get this process across the finish line, build some resources together, and really help out. They also maintain a directory of MSPs that have gone through the certification journey and have passed their assessments. And another great resource that has really helped me in my journey as well is the CMMC Center of Awesomeness. That's a free website out there that has some great resources that really help get through it. A little rough around the edges and a little bit of a harsh reality check in a few places, but they've been really helpful in this journey as well. And great questions. So I see we've got a couple out there here. I can, Andrew, do you want to just go off some of the questions there, or do you want me to take a stab at them?
So I was going to throw them in for you so everyone could hear what they were. So one of the first question that we got are, how many MSPs do you think are truly taking CMMC seriously?
Unfortunately, not enough. I mentioned that on the MSP Collective's website, there's a list of MSPs out there that have gone through this process already. They're the ones that have committed to this the hardest and the most. We've gotten our assessments done, but I still hear the conversations in the channel of saying it's not my problem to worry about. I heard an account yesterday of an MSP that was helping a client get their CMMC readiness journey completed, and then bailed within 30 days of their assessment process. And then others that just haven't really delved into it because they either don't have the time, resources, or experience, or even insights to know what to do there. But it's a challenge. But there are significant consequences to this. The thing I didn't really get a chance to dive into in the slide deck was something called the False Claims Act. When our clients self-attest those results and that gets sent over to the DoD trusts that. And if you BS them and lie to them on it, they get a little cranky about it. And we've seen several cases over the last few years of whistleblower reports blowing the whistle on companies that have misrepresented or even flat out lied about their CMMC posture, as well as the DoD doing their own inspections on those environments and realize that things weren't adding up. And there is a legal remedy to that. And there are fines, penalties, and more to that, because again, it's a serious matter of national security.
So yeah, I think the next question is, what's the best way for customers who I think as an MSP CMMC applies to, but to really care about this, but they really don't? What's the best way to kind of have them sway in that direction?
So I've seen that from a few different sides before over the journey. I've had those customers that have read the contracts and realized what they've signed up for, and they take it seriously, and they're the real drivers behind it. But others that keep wanting to kick the can down the road or just say, yeah, it's not that important. The key thing that they're entering into on that one, they signed a contract with either a prime contractor, a company like Boeing or Lockheed Martin, or directly to the DoD themselves. Those are hard contractual terms. If they violate those, there's usually the penalties portion of that. Those penalties could result in the form of litigation, whether that be Boeing suing for their money back, or up to those more criminal and civil fines coming from the DoD themselves. So the real question and thought on that is really to highlight that risk to them. If they are comfortable potentially risking their entire business and bottom line, that's their decision to make. I would not want to be in their shoes making that call, but they have decisions to make around their own risk tolerance. Personally, if I had a client that said we have to do CMMC and then said I don't really want to actually do all these requirements, I'm advocating that we get rid of that client pretty quick, because they're a risk to us in that factor, or on that note. But at the end of the day, they signed the contract. They need to realize that they took taxpayer funds to perform a service on behalf of the government, and the government said to do that process, they must meet these security requirements. It's non-optional. They signed a contract saying they would do it. If they don't, that's a problem.
Yeah, I think it's definitely tough for MSPs let customers go that don't take their recommendations. And I think with CMMC, that makes it a really hard line in the sand, right? So this one coming in from Wes, not trying to get political here, but under Trump's administration, is there any difference in terms of support or opposition to CMMC?
That's a great question, because there's been a lot of back and forth around that. We've all seen the headlines about Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency just cutting out unnecessary processes to things. We've seen the headlines about rulemaking and how that process is supposedly getting put on hold, being revised, all that other stuff around there. But some key notes on that one. The final rule that codified CMMC went through the rulemaking process and became federal law as of December already. It's on the books. The key person inside the DoD and the DoD CIO office, Katie Arrington, she is back. And she was the big proponent of CMMC in the last Trump administration. And ultimately, this process under CMMC got started under the first Trump administration. So, well, things could possibly maybe change. We got to know with what we got to go with what we know right now, and that is that CMMC is already here in the laws. We know they're moving forward with getting it into the contracts. The person behind that at the DoD is back in her position and continuing to move it forward. And for right now, nothing's changing.
Well, I appreciate all your answers. We appreciate all the questions. I don't think there's any more in the actual questions. It looks like have been all submitted. So if there's nothing else,
Yeah, I think I'll just close up, put one closing thought in there. One thing I would really recommend to organizations that are looking at everything right now, the changing in the legislative landscape and where things could go. The simple reality is that CMMC takes time, not only for the MSP but also the client. There's not really much time to sit on the fence anymore. These contracts should be coming out sometime if things go as planned this summer. And in our experience, CMMC took us about a year to go through. The time to get started on this and make some decisions is yesterday. If we didn't get a chance to do that yesterday and we're just hearing this for the first time, the second best time is to do that today. So start doing that research, start doing the homework, start making those decisions, allocating funds if that's the route you want to go. Or if you've got those clients, maybe they only represent, one client out of 100, and it's just not worth it for you to go through that process. Now's the time to start talking transitions. But if it is something you want to do, now's the time to start getting everything in order, start working through that and making the magic happen.
so get on that CMMC path if you're looking to go that direction. There's 4 minutes until your next session. I'll actually be hosting another one with Rodney Bergeron, the RAD approach to security. So if y'all want to hop over there with us, it'll be starting in the next 4 minutes.
Yes, and I would
thank you
highly
to everybody
recommend.
for attending the session.
Yes, thank you. And I'd highly recommend Roddy's session. He's always got some great insights, although I hear he eats crawfish with the shell on, and that was something we were told to heckle him about. So I don't know what he's doing over there with that one, but y'all go hear Roddy talk. He's got some great insights, or check out plenty of the other sessions. And if you can, appreciate everyone for doing this. And huge thanks to Wes and the team that put this all on. And again, thanks to you, Andrew, and for Cork for being part of this journey too.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to the Empath team. And thank you, Wes.
All right. Cheers, everyone.